And it says it's starting. Hello, everybody. I think we're live, bit of technical hiccup there. Adam, can you hear me?
I sure can.
All right, nice to have you with us. And do we have confirmation from the audience that we can be heard? Confirmation is coming, and hopefully, here we go. We'll let folks know we're live. Can you hear us? Philip, can you hear us? We're live. Thanks, man. Talk to you later. Bye. All right. Thanks for suffering through this with me, Adam.
It's okay. It was exceptionally painful. I sat here for like 4 minutes.
4 minutes. So stressful. How did Google
Right.
ever get to be so big when their stuff is so bad? But that's not why we're here today, right?
That's right.
All right, looks like we've got folks who are saying they can hear us, which I think is a huge, enormous win compared to where we were a minute ago. So let's bring up some of the, here we go. Well, Adam, thank you very much for joining us today. Really excited because I have had a lot of pushback from clients on what I know that the Twitterverse has kind of sent us some hate about the idea of selling Agile, and we'll
Yeah.
explain about what that means. But the reality is if you're using an Agile process, then you're going to have to explain to clients how it works. And sometimes that means you're going to have to ask them to participate in it. So I just want to set the stage. When we talk about selling Agile, what we're not talking about is painting ourselves with a big A and saying, well, we're Agile, you should buy from us. What we are talking about is that the Agile principles come along with a set of very particular practices, some of which seem entirely unintuitive to the uninitiated. So when your clients are not software experts, folks, you need to be listening to this because that you have to be able to explain how you work. And Adam is the co-owner and co-founder of Zeal. So Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us what Zeal is and just give us a little background on how you guys use Agile.
Yeah, so Zeal is a web and mobile applications consultancy in its very sterile and clinical sense. But more the sexy version of it would be that it's a product and experience company. So we work really hard to deliver products that deliver great experiences to customers. And what we acknowledge is that a huge component of that has to do with actually creating an enjoyable development experience too. So it trickles down the chain to the end customer ultimately.
So hold on. I've heard a lot of people say the part about we create beautiful products or experiences for our customers, clients, but you seem to be talking about something else. This enjoyable experience for your client, is that some way that they are going to enjoy interacting with you?
Absolutely. So this actually comes a little bit from many other kind of business models where well, there's a phrase I love to say, and that is energy begets energy. So when, just like any leadership or something where there's a chain of events where one entity or individual is affecting kind of their microcosm, which ultimately affects the one out it and so on and so forth, we believe that it's very similar in the software world too, especially when we build products. So what I mean by that is that we work really hard as a consultancy to make an amazing experience for our customer and work really, really diligently to make sure that the experience and the vision that they have in their head is translated all the way down the chain, but to start from a place of, true empathy and excitement. So it ultimately becomes our responsibility to generate that excitement, help them have a really good time, and trust that the vision in their head can be translated down the chain, that we can effectively like extract that out of their brain by helping them, get into this really highly creative space.
So I don't think I've ever heard anybody say this before. This idea of a competitive advantage of working with you is that if I hire you, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not just going to get out of it what I hope to. I'm not just going to impress my boss or my client, but somehow I'm going to have fun along the way. It seems like I've just never heard that sold before. What do people like that? Is that a desire? I suppose it's desirable, but what do people react to?
They totally hate it. They can't stand it. anytime you can provide a great experience, they tend to resist. People just in general would rather not have a good time. So I think I'm wrong.
Disneyland proves
It was
that.
nice talking to you.
Take care. That's right.
Take care.
The next podcast, Selling Angry, will be with another person.
Angry. That's right. No, yeah. So Zappos is a company that was really identified for productizing a great experience. At the end of the day, they're transacting, it's e-commerce, and they're, transferring money for shoes and clothing items. There's there's not a ton of experience involved in that, but they were one of the many companies but one of the few companies that really stood out as being about the experience, and that experience not being a direct tie to the noticeable product they're selling. Again, like the shoes or that transaction. I came from a company. I was a creative director for 6 years for a company I think it's going to go down in the history books for great customer service. And that company focused very intently on the customer experience and making sure that the customer themselves was having a really good time. It had nothing ultimately to do with the product being transacted. It was just the medium to provide that experience. But ultimately, the discovery, the realization that I made before co-founding Zeal had to do with that ideal that, that the experience you provide is the product you're selling. The other tangibles are simply the transaction mechanism. It's the thing that the customer is going to use to justify that, and make them feel maybe a little less weird about wanting to just come see you. It's a weird sort of byproduct. And so again, when we founded Zeal, that's where the name comes from. Is Zeal, just in those 4 letters, says nothing about software. It says nothing about applications. It says nothing about dollar for hour, work for hire stuff. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with a core mentality, a core value system, a core ideal of being about experience, being about enthusiasm, being about excitement, those things.
No, that makes sense. And given that I asked you to come on because I know you guys are truly a tier 1 Agile shop. Clearly you have a lot of zeal, a lot of excitement around Agile, but how do you start to, when you interact with a client, maybe it's the first meeting, do most of your clients already know about Agile development? Are they experts? Do you only work for people that are experts, or do you have some clients that really you're their first exposure to it?
Interestingly, we've found that a lot of the companies that come to us have exposure to Agile. Unfortunately, they have a very wide and mixed exposure to Agile. Some have had great experiences. Most absolutely have not. And I think Agile ultimately has become such a broad term that it just doesn't encompass all the different, it encompasses many different flavors of Agile. And so it's also not entirely fair to say that as a consultancy, like we're an Agile shop and you want Agile, because there are versions of Agile which you probably don't want, that don't fit the profile and the needs that you have as a business. Recently, I think it was actually on a webinar that you had recently done, where it was said that sometimes waterfall is in fact the right approach for some people and some organizations. And it may not have to do with software, but some industries heavily rely on a waterfall-based approach. So to say that Agile is the best way for everything or for a majority of things isn't fair either. It's really what flavor of Agile are you going to pick? And ultimately what you're saying is what practices and what principles do you feel are the best recipe for success? That's ultimately what you're saying.
So do you guys shape your practices around what the client wants, or do you have a set of practices and you say, this is the way we do things because it's the way we work together the best, or for some other reason?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that has to do with the psychology of the buyer a little bit, to be honest. Part of that has to do with when you're hiring a consultancy or a team, you're likely to be paying more per hour unless you go overseas, and even then probably still the case. But you're likely to be paying more per hour, or your bottom line expense will be likely to be higher when you pay for a consultancy versus build your own team individually. So part of the value proposition of hiring a consultancy has everything to do with their ability to deliver, and as a result have a process they can follow. One of the most uncertain things that can occur for a client that's working with any company is that it's like, well, wait a second. If ultimately I'm just paying dollars for hours and you just have the people, but effectively I still have to have the process and the mechanisms and all that stuff, then the question naturally comes along, well, what am I paying the inflated rate for? Because that's how it comes across, as the inflated rate.
Right.
I might as well just do it myself. And I think that's where the pain points of Agile have emerged for a lot of companies, a lot of individuals, is that they feel like it's processless or it is accountability-less. And the byproduct of that is they feel like they have to impose structure because there is this belief that there is a lack of structure or a lack of formality, that there's a lack of process just in general.
So it starts to feel like staff augmentation. They work for me. I
Right.
tell them what to do, but I have all the headaches. I have to figure out what they're going to do. Clearly, that's not the way it was sort of intended or sold.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to that, so what you can still sell, you can still promote, you can still publish a company that does staff augmentation effectively at a rate that is higher than that of the company going out and hiring them themselves. Of course, you can do that, but as a result, you will almost always be scrutinized for your rates and your prices, because your value is you are putting yourself on a similar level as everyone else that is in the pool. You're not differentiating yourself, and you're not providing value above and beyond the lines of code you write. And maybe the individualized experience that you may create. And that's totally fair, but if you really want to be a comprehensive product team that delivers a real experience, a real comprehensive, definitive, excellent product, then having a process that you stand behind is something that your clients will rally with you on, because they want you to have that. They yearn for that expertise. They want to be learning. And so we think of it more in that format, that our process is meant to teach. The byproduct of that activity is the product being produced, because that's kind of a guarantee. I say this oftentimes, that iteration is failure proof if you practice it properly. With that single mentality in mind, it's a very simple and very direct value proposition. Like, let's do this together, because you won't lose by having us around. You just won't. Our process is failure proof.
I love it. Our process is failure proof. I haven't met too many people who could say that. Well, I want to dive into this first question because I get this a lot. Okay. And maybe I should ask if you guys even do this process, but there is a concept out there called a roadmap session or a discovery session, or sometimes it gets called sprint zero. And it has to do with the time you interface with a client. Usually it's the first time money is exchanged, by which you figure out what the client needs, at least in big picture. So there's usually this idea of like, let's create a roadmap to get you where you need to go. And then let's also plan out the first part of where
we're going to plan the plan. Let's plan the plan, but we're going to do it in an agile way. We're going to agilely create a plan to not be agile with our plan that we've planned.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And so a lot of people I talk to, that's a bestseller for sure. A lot of people I talk to, they struggle to sell this idea to the client that there's value there. The client begins to distrust their process immediately when they want to have a road mapping or a discovery session. And they will say, well, I can't get him to buy it, and I guess we just have to start even though we're not sure what we're building. And I mean, kind of ridiculous things. But do you guys do a session or a phase that encompasses the beginning planning, or and if so, how do you orient your clients to see the value in that?
Yeah, we absolutely do. So it's, call it what you will. All of those things are true. I've never heard of Sprint Zero. I'm not a Coca-Cola fan. It's just funny.
Well played.
I hope everyone's laughing. That was
well played. Oh, clearly everyone's laughing. Clearly, that's right.
There's tons of tweets now.
Let's go on.
So yeah, absolutely. So we definitely do a discovery phase, and we also can think about it as onboarding. And the way that it's intended and the way in which it's presented has everything to do with placing. Again, this has to do with putting the product owner as we think of them, and the product owner being the torchbearer, Oftentimes they're the ones cutting the check or approving the project. They're the ones that have got the vision, the passion, the excitement, and are looking to put it into action, right? That's who we think of as the product owner. So this discovery phase is mostly focused around them. And the way in which we present that, and this is very real, this is not just like a thing to do. No, it's very, very important and very real, is it's an opportunity for the key visionaries to relay in all their passion and excitement their hopes and dreams. That's the goal. This is their primary opportunity to say, this is the problem we've identified, this is how huge it is, this is the constraints we have, and this is the great successes we hope to achieve. Like, and it's a very exciting experience. And when you put it in that position where it's like, it's not about talking about the logistics and, we're going to talk about the technology stack and we're going to make some definitive decisions about that. It's not about any of that. I think when you fall prey into making it about that, then it loses its value very, very quickly to that audience, because they're like, can't you just do it? I mean, like, I appreciate it, but can't you just do it? Do we need to pay to have you sit around and talk about it? Can't you just do it?
Yeah, right? I know what I want.
Yeah,
I'll just tell you, and then you do it, and we'll be done. But
that's right.
You want to waste my time,
right? And it's not that, and I think it's because it's being presented in an inaccurate fashion. It's being presented as a means of discussion versus an opportunity to relay vision. And so we make, like in our discovery phase, it can range, generally it's a day. So that is a session where as many members of the team are available and on for that. So all members of the development team, of course, the product manager, and in our world, a product manager is one who takes vision and turns it into actionable user stories. And they generally facilitate that program. And then it is absolutely required, as far as we're concerned, that the product owner and any of the key stakeholders be present, and they're present for that whole experience. Because, as they say, first impressions are practically the only impressions. So it's like, with that being said, this is a great opportunity for them to get excited, for us to be on board with their excitement, for the engineering team to experience their excitement, and for them to feel heard. I mean, like, that's a big thing. It's empathy, right? It's feel heard, feel like somebody, like we actually care, because we actually care that the product wins. And we want to know what you want about it. Like, what's so exciting that gets you juiced? So let's make sure we're fulfilling that. So it's phrased as such.
And this is a requirement. You didn't say this was optional. Like if a client says, I'm too busy, I'll just write it down and send it to you and you guys get started. Will you work with that client?
Not necessarily. No, it's tough. I mean, I will say this, to be totally real about anything when it comes to being a consultancy, is it's very, our experience is that it requires a heavy degree of empathy. And so I think a lot of that starts with working diligently to understand where the other person is coming from. And so a part of like our sales process, I guess you say, or how we present it, has a lot to do with, let's start there, that we make the assumption that nobody's trying to screw you, right? We're going to have blind faith that everybody's really wants the best, and that there is a real and true desire for mutual trust. So when presented with that question of, or that issue of, well, do we need to do it at all? It's really, it goes back to, do you trust us? Like, at a core level, do you trust that we're going to do what's in your best interests? And if you don't, then it might be a discussion for, maybe this won't work out. But if you do, then oftentimes the conversation turns around, and it's really more, then you need to give us the opportunity to show you why you do.
So you actually will ask a client, do you trust that we have your best intentions at heart?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a partnership through and through. Just because they cut the check doesn't mean that it's a guaranteed relationship. There's no hierarchy in that regard. There really should never be. And the moment that there's this awkward managerial hierarchy that starts to emerge, we almost immediately have issues, because it doesn't, the communication patterns that exist inside of a real, authentic, level playing field of partnership, they don't exist when you have hierarchy, when there's this heavy degree of like I dictate direction, period. And, and you don't have to understand. I don't really care if you understand. I just care that you do the work.
Hold it. Have
that
you
doesn't
been in
work.
some of my client meetings? Because I feel like I've heard these things
That's right.
before. And I don't know if you know this, Adam, but they have the money and you want the money. So doesn't that inherently make them the boss?
You're right. I don't know what I was saying. I was just making all that other stuff up. That's true. The bigger the check, the farther I bow.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
That's the temptation, right? I like what you say, but is it, you've kind of inferred this, and I just want to keep it real. It is hard. It's
very,
hard
very
to
hard.
sit across from somebody who wants to give you money and say, the money is not enough. There's got to be more to it. And to know with full heart that if all this transaction was about was money, that it's not going to work out.
Yeah, and before we even get to the point of that meeting, there's a lot of interviewing that happens on both sides of the table, and the goal is that we can work. If you think about it in that format, that interview fashion, inevitably it starts that way. That you have two groups on opposite sides of the table that are where there's the feeling or the perception that both sides are fighting for their best interests, and we don't know each other. So because of that, we need to make sure that our outcomes are achieved, and we need to ensure that our ideals are maintained. So before we even get to that discovery phase, the goal is to validate whether or not we can sit on the same side of the table together. So that I would say that before we even get into that meeting, when documents are signed and deposits or whatever's have been exchanged, we have a heavy degree of confidence that we know who's with us and whether or not they can be a partner in that regard. And so it also gives us it affords us the ability to be very blunt and clear, because at that point there is an established level of trust. And I think that's a core component to it, is when you address it in the very, very beginning. You're like, in the extreme methodologies and with Agile, there's a series of Bill of Rights, and it can be very helpful to address, well, for you have these concerns, you have these pain points, you have these experiences that have gone awry, and they're totally fair. I'm not going to invalidate those things. I'm going to acknowledge them to be real. And we have similar sort of experiences and pain points too. So let's get it all out on the table. And now let's talk about how we can overcome those together, right? We have fears about having clients that, are wonky or crummy, right? And you have experiences of working with companies that are wonky and crummy. So let's talk about what makes us not wonky and crummy. Like, let's talk about that, work out a plan, and go from there. So yeah, a lot of it is what you do beforehand.
That sounds like amazing transparency.
Tons of transparency.
Yeah, maybe a little TMI there sometimes. So one of the questions that we got previous to this, I think it's now I just want to step back. You guys are an Agile shop. A lot of people say they are, but you, in my mind, are one of the few Agile shops that actually does this crazy practice called extreme programming, which actually involves pair programming, right?
And mountain bikes. We're always coding on mountain bikes, climbing rocks with iPads. That's how we do this. That's extreme. That's why it's truly extreme. Like, this isn't extreme. This is not extreme. Extreme is like,
are you eating
blindfolded with it's either knives or pins on your keyboard, or it's a keyboard, but it's like Russian roulette of typing.
That's right. That's right. Well,
that's what we do.
For those of you that don't know, the book you held up, Extreme Programming, clearly one of the older, I guess, flavors of Agile, right? Kent Beck. And in that book, he advocates for all developers writing production code, at least this is what I've heard, who work in pairs. Crazy thought. So the question from the audience is this: how do you respond to, I assume, the client's presumption that pair programming reduces productivity? And that inherently, and they didn't go on to say this, but when I've talked to clients about pair programming, they just look at me as though I'm talking about somebody, maybe my plumber doing pair plumbing, or my mechanic doing pair mechanicking, and which seems like ridiculous concepts. But how do you sell this idea to your clients?
Well, so there was a brief back and forth dialogue about this topic of selling it, and I think that in summary, it's totally fair. It's not something that you sell. It's something that is a process you believe in, and it's a core value system and configuration model, functional model that you follow because you believe in its benefits.
Okay,
So
so you but you don't just hide this. You don't say, no, no, don't look
no.
behind the curtain, right?
No, but it is not brought up as a debatable or as an optional practice in the sense that it's like, so we'd love to do pair programming. Are you on board? It's not brought up like that. No, it's
Right.
that we pair program. And so, when we talk about rates and so forth, it comes up, and oftentimes the question is, so, do you bill for both people when you do it? And the answer is yes, we do. I know it's, and they're like, oh, so you bill twice as much. No, it's that what we've identified is that the value of collective thinking outweighs that of siloed development and siloed thinking, right?
But
So
it must be at least half as much expensive. I mean, just intuition says so, right?
intuition says a lot of things that are wrong, but and here's the thing is I'm also, I'm not saying that it is or is not more or less expensive. That's not really the thing to focus on. The question is what is your outcome, and do you trust us? And if you do trust us, then but you still have questions about it, then we can address those. And so what we've discovered is, or a way to think about it is this: building software is not like building a house. There's a lot of fixed costs in a house. There's a lot of known development aspects of it, right? You have blueprints and you have materials, and there's a lot of patterns to follow that get you really close to understanding how to develop a given solution. Software development is very different. It's more like a science experiment. You have a series of known hypotheses. You have a series of different methods and metrics on how you're going to assert whether or not those hypotheses are validated as true or false. And you're going through this iterative process of combining elements and running tests and asserting success and pivoting where necessary. And you're going to add a little here and remove a little there, ultimately to define whether or not you built this perfect permutation that is the product, right? That's the process of software development. So if I was to say to you that be true, or I was to say to you, or if I was to say to you that be true, then I'd ask you one fundamental question, and that is would you rather do it alone or with another very intelligent individual? Somebody who can catch like the mistakes being made, that can help assert like, is this the most appropriate way to test and determine whether or not this is the right and best solution? It's very different in that format. If you could take a test with a buddy, would you do it?
Yeah, every time.
Absolutely. Every single time. It's not about being right. It's not about that. Software development, and especially being a consultancy, is you pay us for our R&D. You pay us for our ability to overcome a challenge by, adding the right things here and removing the right things there, and ping-ponging back and forth down this, tumultuous terrain, this vicious river, ultimately to get to the lake, right? And you're like fighting the onslaught of opportunities and blah and everything, and you're like, would you rather do that alone, or would you rather do that with a team? And unanimously, it's going to be, well, I'd rather do it with a team, because now we've got a collective sensibility, and that's exactly what we do. That's why pair programming has value. On a more functional level, a lot of it has to do with being cross-domain. So as an example, you may have individuals as engineers, this exists in every industry, that are specialists in certain areas and generalists in others. So you may have heard this term before, which is being T-shaped. And what is a wide breadth of knowledge, right, with a specialty in there, right, being a T-shaped type of person. Ken Beck actually had said to Trevor, one of my co-founders, that in fact, what you really want to look for is M-shaped people, right? Like they understand the sides of the total ends of the pendulum really, really well, but they also have a specialty somewhere in there too. So they have a sense of the landscape. That really resonates for me as well. But
that sounds like Ken.
It does. It sounds like Ken Beck, right?
Yeah.
And so taking that ideal and saying, well, the cross-domain ability, the multidiscipline collaboration that can occur can be beneficial so that you take this T, which is really thin, and you start to expand its depth as a whole, so that you can have people that become interchangeable. And it's not that they're cogs in a machine, but it's that they become interchangeable to the project. So you have a great sense of redundancy. You have a great separation and diversity and distribution of knowledge. And ultimately, you end up with a cohesive, collective team that's all leveled up at one point in time, right? Instead of just like, well, this person stays smarter than everybody else and more capable. No, we level everybody up.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I could ask you, I'm really interested. I like the way you phrase that software development is not like other things. It's not like building a house or maybe building a boat or fixing a car, or things like that. One of the things that that has been asked, and I think it's important to touch on, there's a big trend right now amongst a lot of people I'm talking to that talks about, don't talk about your tools when you're selling. And this actually goes back to like your marketing and your messaging and your selling proposition. And when you first meet a client, there's a lot of shops out there who self-identify as, I'm a Rails shop, I'm a WordPress guy, I'm a Drupal guy, whatever it is. Those people are a little ashamed, so they don't really talk about it. But you get the idea. And it's all about, like, if you went to a mechanic, he might be like, oh, I'm a Stanley guy because all my tools are Stanley, right? And in reality, he probably ought to be saying, I'm a foreign car mechanic. So if you have a foreign car, this is what I specialize in.
For sure.
So somebody's asked this question, why do you even sell Agile services or pair programming? And you've kind of mentioned that you don't, in that they aren't the selling point, but should you be emphasizing the practices or the results? Is it important that the client even know that you're doing pair programming or this thing called Agile development? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I think you've touched on it a little bit.
Yeah. So what I would say is that it's a change in perspective. So it's not. So we have suffered for sure from selling the tools. We were just like that. And to a certain extent, we have stayed that way, but we've also identified that we need to change. And that would be that we, sell Ruby on Rails applications or, Ember applications, certain technology stacks as being the selling point. Like, we're looking for companies or clients that are that. When we asked ourselves why that actually mattered, it came down to two things. One was what we believe we're experts in, so core competency. And another one had to do with the feeling of wanting to be a craftsman and or following great practices. And certain frameworks, certain tool sets are more conducive or more in alignment with those ideals and things. You can think about like a simple thing as like a to-do list, of the thousands or I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of to-do lists that are out there. The differentiating factor between them becomes their focus, right? We are focused on team collaboration as a to-do list, Asana, for example. We are focused on the getting things done, the GTD methodologies, OmniFocus, for example. All at a core, their core tool set is to be a task list, but what they are doing is they're attaching themselves and specializing per se along a value proposition. And that's ultimately what it becomes. So what we've realized is that it's not about being a Ruby shop or being experts in the Ruby programming language. It's more about illustrating to the end consumer, the customer, the CTO, that we have these similar ideals and we have a core competency. So, if you have an application or you believe in similar ideals, I want a Ruby on Rails, architected app, then you come to us because you also want a Ruby on Rails kind of architected application. So there's kind of a difference between there. So it's changing the verbiage to being more about what is your value proposition. And if your value proposition involves certain tool sets, then maybe they're presented as such, but being more tied to your value proposition. What is it that you stand behind? What is it that you ultimately bring to the table? And then you can ask yourselves what tools are the best to facilitate that. And then it may be a part of the conversation then.
do you find that Rails is still popular and Ember and these, I don't know, Angular, these front end things, still popular enough that you get someone coming in the door saying, I want a Rails Ember application. I know that this is what I want to solve the problem with. That's part of the reason why I'm here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because it's a starter to the conversation. So here's the way I would think about it: is it's like going, it's like saying, okay, honey, what do you want to have for dinner tonight? And you're like, oh, I feel like I want a burger tonight. That's what I want, right? Or I want a burger tonight. And you're like, okay, well, let's go to a great burger joint. Well, what's left is, okay, well, you get to the restaurant, you look at the menu, and you're like, wow, there's 24 different burgers to choose from.
All of them those are promises made in the pre-sales.
Right, right? Yeah. And then you look over here to the right, and all of a sudden there's other things, right? They offer specials, right? Things that may not be what you came in for. And that's, I think, the way we think about it is, the part of the value we bring to the table has to do with our analysis. And we have many times experienced moments with new clients where we have fundamentally changed the stack that they're building on, or radically changed the product, because we've asked really good questions about what values or what things are you trying to overcome. And maybe potentially they're making inaccurate assumptions or about ways to solve that problem. Not to say that they're bad, but they're just maybe not as experienced. We experience 12 different applications in a given year spread across the entire team. We just have a wide breadth of experience. And so, so ultimately getting back to like, well, what did you come here for? Well, the reality is I want something savory. It wasn't about having a burger. It was about something that was really savory, really meaty and protein oriented. Okay, well, you thought about this chicken sandwich that's super stellar, that's on the special today? No, that sounds good. I want that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you come for the Rails, but you stay for the pie.
That's my next book. Thanks. You come for the Rails, you stay for the pie. Yeah, that's it.
I suppose that it's in that discovery phase that you are listening for. Did you come in for a hamburger, or did you come in because you wanted some protein, or did you come in because your wife wanted a hamburger, or sort of the why are you here? And that's when you can spread out the menu a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Asking really good questions. And that being a really kind of core component is, working really hard to listen. Again, that's where the discovery phase comes in. That's why I caution against going right into the technology stack and having discussions about that, because you may not have taken the appropriate amount of time to really ask the question of what is it that you're trying to do, because it may not make sense. Here's a perfect example. This has happened many times, is the difference between a native iOS or Android application versus a web application that is mobilized, right? So, oftentimes they'll come in and saying, I want a mobile app. Well, do you know the drawbacks of having a mobile app? Maybe what you want is you want a website that scales and transforms appropriately for a mobile device. And that's probably the most, apt and, consistent example is that.
I mean, when I go to a restaurant, sometimes I feel like a burger, and I sit down and I look at the menu, and if the restaurant is kind, the way I think about it, it says this burger is 1,400 calories, and all of a sudden, in the same way as like, oh, a mobile app is $60,000, right? My appetite changes for it, and I get a little bit of reality shock. Now, in this discovery thing that you talk about, I want to challenge you, because I used to do these discoveries, and there was always this temptation, okay? The temptation is, let's bring as few people to this party as possible. The devs, now we'll translate requirements. The designers, now we'll get them some wireframes. Let's just get the key important people.
But the important people, let's be clear about that. The important people.
I don't know why you had to point that out. Maybe But
I'm just mirroring your words. That's all. The important people.
But you said something different. You said we bring everybody. Isn't there a temptation to cut your own costs, to really limit that team size in the beginning pieces? And what's the value of having the whole team there?
Absolutely. There's always the temptation. A question that we ask ourselves I hope to ask every single time is, how can we bring the most value to the company and clients that we work with? Whatever that means, as ambiguous as it is. And so that is an area where it comes up. We are a company that does not necessarily, I mean, we bill everybody's hour. So if you look at it as a bottom line expense, it's a very expensive experience. So that's why it's so important that you understand its real value. And so part of that has everything to do with looking at the team as being individual points of value and being ingredients in the petri dish of creativity, right?
The petri dish of creativity, the evolution.
The petri dish, yes, of product creativity. So here's a great example. And as an engineer myself, this is the feeling that I had is oftentimes I'll ask myself, what if they would have only asked me, I would have been able to tell them this, right? If I would have only known that that's what they were trying to do and that's what they wanted to achieve, I would have suggested something different. So the example that I use a lot is, oftentimes things like graphs and charts seem trivial and easy. Well, can't you just present the information, right?
It's a graph.
It's a graph, right? Everybody's got graphs. What's wrong with graphs? Google's got graphs.
That's right.
Excel's got graphs. Search bar.
20 years, right? Search bar. Yeah.
Right?
How hard could a search bar be?
How hard could it be? Google did it. And you're like, yeah, right, exactly.
Sure.
And so the thing that is often overlooked is that the individuals that spend the most amount of dedicated time in any given product are the engineering crew. Hands down. They experience every detail, every click, every drag, every drop, every underlying technical challenge. They experience the whole gamut of things. The product owner generally will likely only experience the couple of test clicks, the few different demo examples, and that's about it. So the likelihood that the engineering on the engineering side, they are going to experience the product more like the customer would experience is more probable than even that of the product owner, even though they're passionate about it. And oftentimes the engineers themselves are less attached emotionally to the project. And so because of it, they see it more objectively. They see it as like, oh, I see why that could totally go awry. Like, I see why as a user that sucks. And had only somebody been willing to ask me that, I could have given them some very valuable feedback where we could have changed it from this dynamic auto-completing form field into a few checkboxes, had they just asked me, right? So we want to bring everybody to the table, the engineering team more than anybody, simply because, so number one, they have a voice, and because they experience the product more than most anyone else is going to experience it. Period.
I feel like it. Wow. I feel like it really changes. It sort of strips away the hierarchy. Started to say the important people versus the little engineers who sit in the back, right? The mushrooms, we'll call them. Okay, I just have to ask. So you said these are expensive meetings, these one-day meetings. Can you tell us, like, how much do you charge?
How much we charge? It's millions. It's millions of dollars.
No. Come on, really. How much does one of these? So let's just say it's a one-day meeting with 3 engineers and your other folks. What is one of these? What should the audience here be thinking about in terms of what they should charge for this?
So it's kind of okay. So I'm not afraid to answer the question for the sake of saying the numbers, but I actually think it's an unfair question, and here's why: is because what it puts the focus on is the bottom line and not on its value. So to be direct, the way we charge everything is every person sitting at the table is billing by the hour. So if you've got an hourly rate and you have a 4-hour meeting and there are 4 people sitting at the table, you have 4 times your hourly rate times 4 hours. And if you look at that number, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm charging that much for that meeting. And so I would say is if that's what you're looking at, then you don't fully understand its value. Then you don't embrace what about it is worth every penny. To put it differently, let's put it into a totally different scenario, and that is, building a bridge. So we're building a bridge across some sort of crevasse of some kind, and And we're like, okay, so the product owner comes to the table and we need a bridge. And they're
Great.
like, okay, well, what do you want to do with the bridge? Well, we want to put people on from this side of the bridge to that side of the bridge. Okay, fair enough. And what do you want to do? Well, we need cars to go over the bridge. Okay, so we're going to build it for cars to go over the bridge. Yeah. And we want 2 lanes on both sides. We don't want just one stupid lane. We want 2 lanes. Well, why not 3? Yeah, we want 3 lanes. 3 lanes is so much better. Totally, so much better. And we're going to build that over the top of that. We're like, that's great. Cool. Okay, so we're going to build this bridge. And we're like, yeah, we're going to build that bridge. Cool. We go and build the bridge, and it costs us a few $100 million. And then somebody down the road says, well, why did we build a bridge? And they're like, well, because we needed a bridge to put cars over the top. And you're like, but why don't they just drive 2 miles down the road, turn left, and now you don't have to build a bridge at all? And you're like, yeah, but we wanted a bridge. Well, totally, right? So if you look at the value as being the collaborative sense of like, let's all get on the same page so that we're all working towards the same goal, that we're all working for the same thing, then it's very apparent why it's critical that everyone sit down at the table in the beginning to get into the same rhythm, to get into the same state, the same sensibility. And that not only has incredible value, but it has, in my opinion, some of the most value is in that one event alone.
But don't you, as the owner of the company, miss hearing developers saying, well, why are we building this stupid feature? It sounds like you're robbing them of that experience because they then get to really understand the project.
Ask that again. I get misunderstood the question.
I said, as the owner of the company, this is what I always used to get, because I didn't always bring the engineers in. And I regret it now that you're saying it, because I used to hear, why are we even building this feature?
Yeah.
They could just drive 2 miles down and turn left. And I'd be like, I wanted a bridge, right? I mean, like, just shut up and build the feature, Bob, you know?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I bet you miss those sorts of conversations because the engineers are there. They can raise these questions early, like, why don't you just drive 2 miles down and turn left? As well as they then have a working context to make a million little decisions along the way. Like you said, nobody's going to be in it more than the engineers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what it is, I think a lot of it has to do with also training the team as a whole. So we spend a good amount of time and effort to make sure that on every level of the organization that everyone understands or has the language. They know, like, okay, so instead of saying that's a stupid idea, or effectively doing that is, to be empathetic and say, first and foremost, understand where they're coming from, right? That they have a lot invested emotionally in it, not just money, emotionally into this. So to meet it with a great sense of empathy, and keeping that in mind. And there's personality types that are conducive to that, those that are not. I'm a person that can tend to be overly empathetic, whereas there's other people who are not. And so I'm somebody that goes the wrong direction with it. Is like I can be the one who doesn't say no when I should say no, or self-deprecates in that regard, because I get so on board and I understand the desire to be passionate. So speaking a little bit to the dynamic of that discussion point is that it's very important that everybody on the team understands and presents their concerns and addresses these issues in a very constructive way. So that's first and foremost. And then the next is that there is a framework for discovery too. So, using the bridge now, it's like, we want to build the bridge, and it's like, well, is there any reason why the user wouldn't drive down 2 miles? Like, why does that not work? Right? So it's not that it's a stupid idea to have it here, but help me understand why that doesn't work. And what will generally happen in that situation, when it's an honest and very empathetic, phrased question, is it will put whoever's on the other side of that question in a position where they're having to justify to themselves why that doesn't work to do it anymore.
Right.
And they'll either talk themselves out of it or illustrate the reasons in a more articulate fashion. And so it's like, well, because it's actually, we need to put a train across the top of this thing, and we can't divert that. Oh, we have a train? Yeah, we have a train.
That's an important requirement.
Right? That's an important requirement. So it's the discussion points that start to pull this stuff out of the product in a way that helps get, again, everybody on the same page, so that it's, so that there's not that pain associated.
I know that when my developers when they started feeling like they were doing stupid features,
Yeah,
or that they were implementing the results of bad decisions that they didn't
sure.
understand, and then maybe I couldn't justify. That was the time. Those are the times when enthusiasm is at its lowest. That's the time when they felt like the work they would, I don't want to say they would start printing out resumes, but they would kind of suffer through it. And but if your brand and if every experience with Zeal is about enthusiasm,
Mhm.
then it seems like that's a prerequisite. You simply have got to do whatever it takes to avoid those little discussions between people to say, this is a dumb idea. Why are we doing it? We have to understand the value, why we're doing things. And we have to feel free to ask questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a culture-based thing, that's very real. What you just illustrated happens plenty often. And I think that's just, it's actually a good sign in my mind. And the reason why I say it's good is that it means that, well, what you can monitor as a business owner per se, like a person maybe in my position, is to ask yourself whether or not it is a sign that the team is working through challenge. Um, do they feel like, are they presenting the information in a format that's constructive, right? Some do it well, some present that well, some present it aggressively, some present it, condescendingly. And as a leader, in my mind, you have to work diligently to make sure that you understand that this is a part of a process that an individual is likely to be going through. Oddly, I think, as a developer and as a product owner, you're going to grieve certain features. You're going to be like, I want that feature back the way I thought it could be,
It had
and
so much potential.
it had so much potential and somebody's screwing it up,
That's right.
or this feature could just be better if somebody would just ask me. And you have to just allow that to be a part of your process. So as an example, some of the things that we institute have to do with a willingness to be very open about it. As a product manager, there's a lot of effort made with the product owner to make sure that that transparency is maintained. And frankly, they understand that this is a part of it. The emotional side of it, the angst, the frustration, the pleasure, that they experience the whole picture. And as a consultancy, our responsibility is to pull that responsibility and that liability of those things off of their shoulders and help them put it into a position where it's constructive, that it's like, hey, like in the retrospective, which happens at the end of an iteration, it's an opportunity to like let loose. And the retrospective literally starts as a 3-column spreadsheet. In column number 1, it literally has a smiley face at the top, and you put the things that you love from the last iteration. Column number 2 has a like little flat face, and it means, questions or things you're indifferent to, the concerns or whatever, but just, things that are indifferent. And then on the right column is the sad face, and it's the pain points. And it's meant to give everybody an opportunity to vent about the process, not the people, but the process, and find constructive ways to work around it. And more, I would say a huge percent of the time, I'll pull a random number out of my butt. Let's say it's 80% of the time. It's good enough just to present, just to be able to let it out. Like, I just want to be able to put it somewhere, even if we can't fix it. I just want to know that I'm able to put it on a document and voice my concern and, feel heard. And it's really important that the team always has that opportunity. And it's incredibly important that the decision makers in the company experience it. They need to know that this is okay. It's okay for people to go through this process. It's okay.
And this is why there is not this hierarchy, right? If we felt
Right.
we needed to shield the client or the client's boss or whatever, that there was this ladder, and we have to keep our emotions, down here, and we're going to be professional, like up top, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's also not true, and it's just putting on a face. We need to wrap up here in a minute, Adam. Last question from the audience: what is Zeal's lead generation strategy? It seems like you're going after a very particular kind of client that is willing to orient themselves to your way of working, to all the great benefits it has, but do you have a strategy for generating leads or closing leads that you can share with us?
This is kind of an ongoing or a moving target. What we do know is that the industry is very ripe right now and very active, and the demand is just incredibly high. However, it's still relatively it's so diverse that it can be very challenging to like find a specialty, find a niche, and tap into it.
Mm-hmm.
So we still rely very heavily on referral, and I think that is likely to be the case for quite some time. But we put a lot of effort and energy into making sure that we really maximize our opportunities for referral. And what I mean by that is that, and I primarily will play this role, is that that you foster and you encourage conversation about it, and it's not in a salesy way. Like I don't make phone calls for the sake of like getting to close a deal or anything like that. It's that like I have an honest and very true desire to watch the product succeed. If 9 out of 10 of them are going to fail, then it's very likely that we're going to have many in our bank of applications where unrelated to us, they're just going to go under. So it's really unfortunate. So I take put a lot of time and effort into making sure that I reach out and go, is there anything we can help you with? Are you in a position where you could use support right now? And if they say no, that's fine. If they say yes, great. Another thing that often comes up is just simply that you stay top of mind, so that when somebody comes up to them and says, how did you build your product? I've got this great idea. Then they can say, oh, you should talk to the guys at Zeal. They really helped me out. They have an incredible experience, totally worthwhile.
And does that work, this referral thing? I mean, is it working for you?
Yeah, it absolutely does. We've seen a lot of growth year over year. And it's been really beneficial. Another thing to keep in mind too, and we've seen some success with this as well, is don't forget the nonprofit organizations. Oftentimes nonprofit organizations, every nonprofit is going to have a board of directors. And oftentimes in certain nonprofits, boards of directors are run by business people that own businesses themselves. And so they may be key decision makers. So doing work for nonprofits can be a good idea. But I would say that you walk a fine line between why are you doing it? Are you doing it for the sake of doing what's helpful to that organization? Are you trying to get a lead? And I think my mentality about it time and time again is don't do it for that reason. Do it for the sake of really doing a good job and really helping out. And the byproduct of that will be that reciprocated effort. But systemizing it is very much a goal in this coming year. Like we want to systemizing it in the sense of like, okay, like we need to be able to replicate this somehow. We need to be able to measure this better, because what you measure, you can put focus into and you can correct. So
right.
That is a goal of ours. We're not experts at it, but it's been good so far.
Awesome. Adam, thank you so much. Time is up, but just want to thank you again for all your expertise. Folks, if you are wondering, you should rewind this and watch this again. If you're wondering how to sell that discovery phase, if you're wondering how do you get clients onboarded with this particular weird thing called Agile, clearly Adam and Zeal are doing it with a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. And again, Adam, I just want to thank you for coming on today. Really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm going to leave you with one thing, though, Marcus. Here you go. This is the thing. I'm going to leave you with one little nugget. Are you ready? I hate to destroy your entry. Are you ready?
No, bring it. Let's go.
At the end of every stand-up, there's something my partner Trevor started doing, and I have to say it's one of the greatest things in my mind right now, and that is you leave with saying, am I a 1 through 5? 5 being the great, 1 being great. So I'm going to say that this conversation was a 5 for me. I felt really good about it. It was fantastic.
Give it a 5 as well.
You got a full 5.
There you go. And I know you guys are big high fivers as well.
Yes.
I'll give you a virtual high five. There we go. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Adam. Take care.
Thank you, Marcus.